Hello and welcome to this lecture for the Chrysalis Professional Diploma in Psychotherapeutic Counselling Practice. This is component 3, key models incorporated within the pluralistic approach. And this is approach 3, cognitive behavioural therapies. You can find the standards met by this particular component outlined in Moodle and in your written course materials. I will be sharing some slides with you throughout this lecture, and you will be able to view and download these slides from Moodle if you wish to. Please note any questions you might have as you're watching this lecture, and take these questions to class to discuss with your class tutor. Last year you learned about Beck's CBT. Today we're mainly looking at Ellis's Rational Emotive Behaviour Therapy, or REBT, but there's also Mindfulness-Based Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, or ACT, and there's also Dialectical Behaviour Therapy, and we'll just be mentioning those briefly today. So let's firstly remind ourselves of Beck's CBT. So in Beck's CBT, particular attention is given to thoughts, and in particular, automatic thoughts, or we call them ANTs or NATs, negative automatic thoughts or automatic negative thoughts. And these thoughts trigger negative responses from us. And our thoughts come from our schema. So what is our schema? And our schemas are patterns of internal experience, so our memories and our beliefs. And maladaptive schemas occur when our needs are not met in childhood. So let's look at an example of how automatic thoughts set off a negative cycle. So in this example, the trigger is meeting a new boyfriend. And this person's automatic negative thought is he will leave me at some point. Now that thought would have come from this person's schema. She's probably got a belief that everyone will leave me. So whatever happened in her childhood, there was some negative experience there where somebody left. Maybe parents got divorced and dad left and she didn't see him. Or maybe parents died. Regardless of what it was, the belief is that people leave, and she's expecting this new boyfriend to leave. So what are her emotions? Anxious and insecure. And so the consequences of that, her behaviour, is that she could become clingy and really needy, or she could be accusing, or she could just push him away, almost like, I'm going to get rid of you before you can have the chance to get rid of me. So it's a bit of a vicious cycle there, because when she becomes clingy or needy or accusing, then she's probably going to get the results that she least wants. The boyfriend probably will leave. So it's a bit of a self-fulfilling cycle going on there. So CBT proposes that a system of schemas maintains our responses. So we need to identify what we're doing and thinking now, rather than responses that were formed in the past. So CBT aims to help a client take responsibility for their actions in the present, and to understand that they can learn to think differently in the present about something. So Beck proposes that distress is the result of faulty thinking. So let's look at that, distorted or faulty thinking. So we may have Inferences. Now, inferences are when we guess or try to forecast, or we have a hunch about something, but it might not be true. We may have very selective perceptions based on our past experience. We may have very judgmental perceptions. We may overgeneralize, like all men leave. We might personalize something when it's not meant to be personal. And we can have all or nothing thinking as well. So they're all examples of distorted thinking, which happen a lot with some people. And this is what we really need to change. We need to change somebody's distorted thinking. So this is what we're aiming to do in CBT. We get people to challenge their automatic negative thoughts and their distorted thinking, so that they can function better in the world, so that they can have more rational thoughts, which give better consequences. So let's now look at REBT and the similarities and the differences with that. So REBT discusses two types of cognition. One is inferences, which I've already said about. It's guesses, forecasts, hunches, and they can be accurate or not accurate. And then beliefs, and beliefs are evaluations about the personal significance of events. And rational beliefs are non-absolute, they're rational, and they're logical, they're based on reality. Whereas irrational thoughts can be rigid and illogical and self-defeating. We might awfulize. They can be stated in absolute terms like ought to, I must. So depression and anger and guilt and anxiety can occur when people make these unrealistic demands on themselves. And Ellis sees these emotions as unhealthy responses to negative events, as they generally impede our pursuit of our goals. And irrational beliefs underpin most self-defeating behaviour. So similar to Rogers' conditions of worth in person-centred therapy, and to Freud's superego in psychodynamic therapy, Ellis agrees that people are open to influence from others as children. And when we're children, we just take it on, though. We take those messages on. We're not critical of them. We just take them on, and they become beliefs. Ellis goes further than that and discusses individual differences, for example, suggestibility, and in our ability to disturb ourselves. And he proposes that we play a large role in constructing and maintaining our disturbances through our own strong demands. So Ellis proposes that people in distress are lacking insights. So let's move on to look at this. So a client's psychological disturbance is determined by their irrational beliefs about negative events that have happened in their life. So they tend to attribute the cause of their problems to situations rather than their beliefs about situations. So you might have heard that term. It's not the situation you're in that disturbs you, it's the way you think about it. And that is very true. We can choose the way we think about something. So disturbance is maintained by the client continuing to hold irrational beliefs, even when they know that they're not helpful. So rather than try and change the present, they hold on to the negativity and hold on to their distress. So the client needs to consistently practice to think, feel, and act against their irrational beliefs so that they can surrender them. And it's not just enough to acknowledge that a belief is irrational. Someone has got to step outside their comfort zone and challenge themselves and practice new behaviour to actually make it happen. So let's look at REBT goals for therapy. So we need to assist a client to determine their emotional and behavioural disturbance by talking through the problems that they're having. And we need to assist the client to identify the cognitive determinants relating to their disturbance. So we need to understand what's happened to them, why they have these negative automatic thoughts. But we don't go into the past and look at what's happened. We're working in the here and now. So we can identify what's happened and why they're thinking the way they are, but we have to work on it in the here and now. So we have to assist them to continually change their irrational beliefs and inferences. So the therapeutic relationship and agreement on goals and tasks is key in the work of REBT, which is generally short-term and focused on specific goals. And those goals are worked on in the session, and the client also works on them at home. And it's different to person-centered approach because the client has got a much more active and directive approach in this style of therapy. And although the therapist acknowledges the core conditions, they won't be seen as sufficient for change. So in REBT, we have this system of A, B, C, D, E. And A is for activating events. So that's the events that are causing a problem, and it can be family issues or work issues or childhood difficulties. So a situation that's occurring that gives us a problem. And B is for beliefs, and this is the self-defeating beliefs that we have that are the source of unhappiness. And then C is the consequences. So those beliefs will cause thoughts and emotions which are distressing, and then we can behave in a way that is not really in our best interests. So those are the consequences. And then Ellis added D for dispute. So the client learns to dispute their irrational beliefs to enjoy a more balanced outlook on life. And E is for effects. So once the client practices these new behaviours and incorporates these new beliefs into their mind and does that consistently, then the changes start to happen, and gradually over time those new beliefs will become second nature. So let's look at an example. So here we have the activating event, or the situation was this person's partner forgot their birthday. And the beliefs here could be people don't love me if they don't consistently show it. How could they forget? Or do people not realise how important these things are for me? So depending on the individual messages and beliefs this person's taken on board in their early years, they will still hold these beliefs. These beliefs will come up for them. And so the partner forgot my birthday, it's automatically, he doesn't love me. And so the consequences of that could be anger or hurt. They could sulk, they could create an argument, or just hold on to resentment, or even consider finishing the relationship. So we need to get the client to dispute that. The client needs to be able to respect themselves, and also think about it from the other person's point of view. So what else might have happened to make the partner forget? You know, here, this person knows that the partner's been stressed out at work, and they feel bad for not remembering. So we're trying to get the person to think about why they need that so much. Does it really affect the relationship that much? And for the person to gain, you know, their own self-worth and know that they can survive without that, it's not that important. And so the effects of that would be that they could maybe laugh about it instead of getting upset. And maybe they could sit with their partner and talk about it and make some plans to do something else because they missed out on their birthday. You know, so that's the aim. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to dispute those irrational beliefs that come from the past, not from the present. So Ellis proposed that we have 12 irrational beliefs that cause and sustain neurosis. And when they're summarised, they're likely to be that we ignore the positive, we exaggerate the negative, and we overgeneralise. And I think that's true for a lot of people. But we're going to just quickly go through these 12 irrational beliefs. So the first one is that it is necessary for adults to be loved by significant others for almost everything they do. Instead of us concentrating on loving and also loving ourselves, having self-respect. And number two is that certain acts are awful or wicked and that people who perform them should be severely damned. Rather than realising that people act in antisocial and self-defeating ways and that maybe they need help, the way they're behaving is stupid. But those behaviours do not make people bad. And then number three is that things are horrible when they're not the way we like them to be. When really we need to think about how we might change or control something that we don't like. And if we can't do that, then we really need to accept it and put up with it. It doesn't necessarily make life awful. That human misery is invariably caused by external events and forced onto us by events and people. In place of the idea that neurosis is mostly caused by the view that we take of unpleasant or imperfect situations. So again, it's not what happens to us, it's the way that we view it that is so important. That something we perceive as dangerous or full of fear should cause us to be upset and obsessive about it, instead of deciding to face it and thus render it as non-dangerous. Or if it's inevitable, then work with that inevitability. That it's easier to avoid life's challenges, which in reality usually turns out harder than facing them. You know, we can't just avoid challenges in life. We won't grow and develop. That we need something stronger than ourselves on which to rely. But actually, we can take responsibility, we can take risks and act independently. That we should always be competent, intelligent, and highly achieving in all aspects of our lives, in place of accepting that actually we're human, we've got imperfections, we're not perfect. That because something once affected our life strongly, it should always affect it. In place of realising that we can learn from past experiences and we can grow, but we don't have to be overly attached to them. We don't have to be prejudiced by them and think it's always going to happen in the future. That we must have perfect and certain control over things, in place of realising that the world is full of chance and uncertainty. We can't control everything, but we can still enjoy life despite that. That human happiness can be achieved by inertia and inaction, in place of realising that we tend to be the happiest when we're actually doing things, when we're doing creative pursuits or we're involved in projects. I don't think anyone's just going to be happy sitting back and not doing anything, trying to hide away from the world. And the last one is that we have virtually no control over our emotions and we cannot help but feel disturbed by things. In place of accepting that actually we do have control, we can choose to change the way we feel if we decide to work with our thoughts and our emotions. So they're the 12 irrational beliefs, and in therapy we can use techniques to challenge them. And in REBT we can use Socratic questioning. So on the left-hand side here, you've got some of the beliefs. I must be outstandingly competent or I'm worthless, and others must treat me well or they're awful. And the world should always give me happiness or I will die. So they're irrational beliefs. But we can use Socratic questioning. So is there any evidence for this belief? And if we go back to the case of the girl meeting a new boyfriend, is there any evidence that he might leave? Well, she's got evidence from the past. Say her dad left. Okay, but that was many years ago and it was just one incident. Is there anyone else that's left? And is there any evidence that this boy in particular will leave? Probably not. What's the evidence against this belief? Well, maybe she's had other relationships that have worked. Not everybody in her life will have left her. So we look at the evidence against the belief. Well, what's the worst that you could happen if you dropped this belief? Well, you'd probably be a lot happier if that belief was dropped, and you'd have more faith in the boy, and she wouldn't become clingy or needy or accusing. And then what's the best that could happen? Well, then they'd have a good relationship, and then she might start believing that actually that belief is a faulty belief because someone has stayed with her, they've got a good relationship. So we need to use these Socratic questioning beliefs. We can also look at how would somebody else view this situation? How would somebody else deal with this situation? And the questions are worded in such a way that the client sees just how irrational they're being. And that's really the beginning of change. Now, other methods that REBT uses, we might use assertiveness training. Group work often comes into REBT as well. There are groups. We might use humour, bring humour in, just to make the client realise how silly their beliefs are sometimes. And role play, we might use role play, and we will give some sort of behavioural homework usually, and thought records that can also be homework, and imagery. So in REBT, imagery work is slightly different to how you might use it in hypnotherapy. So we get the client used to being in an uncomfortable position. So, for example, a client that had a fear of flying, you would allow themselves to see themselves being uncomfortable, but at the same time convincing themselves that they can deal with that it's okay. And so behavioural homework between sessions might be small things that just put them outside their comfort zone a little bit so that they get used to being uncomfortable. And Ellis put emphasis on a client having unconditional acceptance and proposes that no matter what we've done, we should accept ourselves for what we are and not what we've achieved. So it's about the client valuing themselves, that they have an inner worth just because they're a living human being. And the YouTube video of Ellis with Gloria, although it's many years old now, it's really worth a watch. And some people think REBT is quite harsh, and it can seem that way. It's very direct. So watch that clip because it will give you a really good idea. I really like REBT personally. Now, generally, CBT and REBT nowadays are put under the banner of CBT. And it's really best used for people with identifiable issues, and it works in a solution-led way. So it's not seen as so good for people with very general unhappiness about life, dissatisfaction. However, for the majority of clients that I see, they've all got irrational beliefs and automatic negative thinking. So therefore, CBT and REBT can be really, really useful, whatever issue a client presents with. So there's many uses, many benefits to this approach. So we learn to stop avoiding things that make us anxious, as we realise that actually it just increases. Avoiding increases our anxiety and our fear. It doesn't improve things in the long term. And it also empowers people because they're helping themselves a lot of the time, and that helps them towards more independence. And facing their anxieties takes away the fear and opens the way for long-term coping strategies. And when the client's doing a lot of the work themselves at home, they're alone, and that again leads to them feeling more empowered and, yes, I can do this. There's lots of self-help books out there on CBT, but obviously nothing is better than having an actual one-to-one therapy. There's also a lot of group CBT. And there's different levels in the practice of CBT, which require different levels of skill from a practitioner. And you might have heard of IAPT, which is the scheme within the NHS that deals with mental health patients. And that trains either high intensity or low intensity CBT therapists. and they mainly work with clients that are depressed or have general anxiety. And the therapist is appropriately trained and is able to assess if the therapy is working and adapt therapy when necessary. And they use tools such as the GAD and the PHQ assessment forms. And if you haven't heard of those, it's worth taking a look at those assessment tools. So the PHQ and the GAD, they're for depression and for anxiety. And they can be quite useful, although they have got limitations. And increasingly GPs are referring to online CBT for people, which is obviously people do it at home on the computer. And I mean, I've heard good and bad about that. It's obviously got its uses for people who can't attend face-to-face therapy. And the other thing that's often used with CBT approaches is mindfulness and meditation, as obviously they're things that help quieten the mind, help people who overthink, help people stay in the here and now. So there's also third wave CBT approaches. So newer developments within CBT are being used now. And two of these are ACT, or acceptance and commitment therapy, and DBT, which is dialectical behaviour therapy. So DBT uses a broad range of cognitive and behavioural strategies, and dialectics means attempting to balance opposite positions and working on how these positions might go together. So it involves the client working on change while also accepting themselves. So it looks at it as though we're doing the best we can at the current time, based on our past experience and current coping skills. But we can also learn more effective ways of doing something. And ACT assumes that psychological problems are due to a lack of flexibility or effective behaviour, and the goal is to choose more effective behaviour, even when the person's thoughts and emotions are telling them otherwise and working against them. So mindfulness is a big part of both of these therapies, and with mindfulness, we're trying to be mindful, stay in the present, think about the behaviour that would be best for us, even if a negative thought is coming in, telling us to do it the old way. So CBT therapies all focus on a client taking responsibility for their responses, for their thoughts, emotions, and behaviour. And if CBT is used alongside the core conditions, then it can fit very well into a pluralistic approach. So let's look at the similarities and the differences. So the similarities: structured sessions, the setting of goals, tasks and methods, a collaborative approach, obtaining client feedback, building on the client's strengths and resources, and personalising the therapy to suit the client, and monitoring the therapy through feedback with the client. The differences: so with the pluralistic approach, there is a strong focus on the core conditions, and that's not necessarily so with pure CBT approaches. Also, the pluralistic approach recognises that lots of different things can help clients. And if we want to know what clients want, we should ask them. So it believes that, you know, we need to involve our clients in the decision making of what we're going to be doing with them. And the pluralistic approach believes that no one model has all the answers. So where CBT therapists obviously think that their way is the best way, the pluralistic approach that believes that no one model is best for every client in every situation, and that it's best to use the approach and the techniques that actually suit that client and that client's issue. So it acknowledges that no approach has managed to distinguish itself overall as better than any other model. And so we can see the value of using all the different models and tools that we're learning about within the pluralistic approach, depending on what the client is like and what issue they're bringing to therapy. And it can be very helpful to use different approaches for different clients and different presenting issues and at different stages of therapy. So that's it for the CBT approaches and how to integrate those into the pluralistic approach that you're learning. We're now going to move on and look at this a bit more, but we're going to look at the self-development part of today's work and how these approaches can benefit us and help us. So we're looking at criticism, handling criticism as a therapist. So part of our self-development work is recognising and reflecting upon how we receive criticism. And not all criticism is given constructively, unfortunately. A client might not think that they're getting what they thought they would get from therapy, and they might become angry or upset. And it could be due to your limitations, or it could be about just the limitations of the therapy we're able to give. But the therapist could become a frustration for the client. And you could also experience criticism from your supervisor. Hopefully, your supervisor will put criticism across in a very good way. But how you hear, accept, and deal with criticism will be due to the circumstances involved, but also to a large extent your own past experiences and your beliefs. So we've looked at how our perception affects our emotions and our behaviour. So it's worth thinking if your past experiences have led you to have faulty beliefs and automatic negative thoughts, which then affect your emotions and the way you behave. So with criticism, for example, a negative self-belief might create an unhealthy response to automatically assume that the person giving the criticism is 100% right. So this person will probably already have low self-worth and not a good belief in themselves. And so when they're criticised, they will think, oh, they must be right. They won't challenge it. They won't think about if there's any validity in what the person's saying. They'll just accept it as 100% correct, which will then add to that self-belief of I'm not good enough. But another unhealthy response might be to assume that the person giving the criticism is 100% wrong. Somebody might get very defensive or angry when they're given criticism. And maybe they're trying to be this ideal person. They've got this view of themselves as this, they can't be wrong, and then they're given the criticism and they become very defensive. And again, it's looking at, trying to look at it rationally and calmly. So is there evidence for what this person is saying, or am I just reacting from old beliefs from the past? So let's look at an example. So the client tells you they're not getting anything from the sessions. Your beliefs might be, I never expected to be criticised. They don't know what they're talking about, or they don't know what I'm trying to do. Or it could be, I can't do this. I knew I wouldn't be any good at this. I must give up. And so the consequences of that is that somebody could be defensive or denying it's true, or they could become attacking, or they could feel low and hurt and even give up the work. So we need to dispute it. And to do that, as I say, we need to do it calmly and rationally. It's feedback from one person, just one person. And we need to think if there's any part of it that's valid, or if it's not valid. And we can weigh that up and decide that. What can I learn from this? You know, yes, I'm only just starting out as a therapist. I don't know everything. I'm not perfect, but I'm trying to improve. I'm doing my best. And so it's looking at it in a rational way, rather than just acting based on the past. And, you know, we may take it to supervision, and we may ask for more details. So using these REBT tools can be really helpful. Helps us when we're looking at this situation, dealing with criticism, but it also can be really useful for all sorts of different areas in our life. So it's good to think about your own unhelpful beliefs and negative thoughts. And you can look at where you learnt them from, where they came from, but they're past beliefs. Do you need to have them in the current situation? And then we need to dispute. We need to dispute these beliefs and these thoughts. So it's really useful. And CBT approaches are slightly different to other approaches in that they really focus on the client taking responsibility for their own responses, and that can't be a bad thing. So that's it on the CBT approaches. A lot to take in, but we're now going to move on to talk about ethics, and today we're looking at diversity. So the pluralistic approach provides us with a framework that is likely to suit a wide range of diverse clients. When we're thinking about diversity issues, we're going to have clients that have all these differences: sex, race, age, disability, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, socio-economic status, and religion. And we need to consider ways in which the therapeutic process and relationship are entwined with their experience of privilege and power and discrimination and powerlessness. Now, our person-centered approach assumes equality in the therapy room, but really when you think about it, how much choice does a client have? Because they don't normally choose when their session is going to be, how long it's going to be for, and how much they're going to pay. And our therapy styles and theories have developed mainly from one cultural perspective. And so we could really direct criticism towards most theorists in relation to working with individuals who don't share the same gender or culture. And cultural identity is based on personal preference, not determined by ethnic characteristics. And it's often determined by language, religion, lifestyle or birthplace. And it can be modified by individual life experiences. So without cultural awareness, the counsellor may not be aware of correct information and the process may go wrong and it could limit the client. They might not be given a fair counselling service. So we should never minimise cultural differences, but on the other hand, we don't want to overemphasise them either, because if we overemphasise them, then it can make it difficult to find any common ground on which to build the therapeutic relationship. So what we're aiming for is balance. We need to try and get a balance by recognising the importance of the similarities between us, but also the differences between us. And we're trying to understand those similarities and differences. And that will help us build a good therapeutic relationship. I mean, it's widely reported that minority culture groups are overrepresented in mental health systems and are the least likely to make use of counselling. And it would be good if we could change that. So what can we do? So we need to consider our own preconceptions about the race and ethnicity of our client. We need to consider that an individual might be quite different from other members of their race or ethnic group, and not make assumptions. We need to consider where our therapy room is located and what our therapy room is like and how that might affect people with all these different characteristics. We need to consider the differences between us and our client and how we both view mental health and illness and family and community and communication. And we need to consider how diversity is connected to social justice so that groups and individuals have equal access to resources and opportunities and benefits. And we need to consider how the pluralistic approach offers potential for putting diversity at the centre of the counselling practice. So the pluralistic approach proposes that we tailor therapy to each individual client and their needs at different stages of therapy. So a diversity perspective will mean that we also highlight the importance of the client's culture and their perspective. And so we might need to alter goals and tasks. We might need to tailor those to relate to elements of diversity and difference. And some tasks and methods that we use might be more appropriate than others, and we need to carefully assess this. What is the best tools and techniques I can use with this person at this current time? But really, our pluralistic approach is really helpful with diversity, because we can incorporate different methods, different approaches, different tools, different techniques, depending on the client that we have in front of us. So therapists need to reflect on how diversity impacts the therapeutic relationship and the goal setting and the agreement of tasks and methods for therapy. And you need to be willing to discuss that in supervision and endeavour to learn and understand the experience of different clients and different client groups. So it's always important to keep learning about diversity. Anyway, that's it for today. So just to recap, we talked about CBT approaches, and we went over Beck CBT, and we talked a lot about REBT. So hopefully you've got a good understanding of REBT. And we looked very briefly at other CBT approaches, ACT and DBT. And we looked at how those CBT approaches fit into a pluralistic approach. And we also looked at how the pluralistic approach is really good when working with diversity. And we looked at how the CBT approaches can be really useful for handling criticism, but also for many other areas in your life where you've got unhelpful thinking and unhelpful beliefs. So I hope you have enjoyed that lecture and gained a lot from it. Obviously, when you have your actual session with your tutor, you can clarify a lot of these points and ask questions so that you understand it in more detail. And you'll also be able to practice some of the techniques. But for now, I'm going to say cheerio, and I will be seeing you again at module 4. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that you can actually, when I say goodbye. So cheerio for now. See you again.